Okay, so we're set up for live stream.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Do I need to wear my mask?
Okay. All right. We're all set.
Okay, well, let's give it a few minutes because right now I don't see anybody, but I've noticed doing so many of these that it can be 10 or 12 minutes after the fact when people start coming. And if we don't get a lot of people, or if we don't, if it's just us, okay, then
We can talk
Fine.
dirty.
we'll have a really great video to put up and it'll be amazing. So it'll be okay. So we're going to wait like 3 minutes and then we're going to go ahead and start. We'll just move into it and we'll see. And like I said, if we don't get people or a lot of people, no big deal. Oh, someone is here.
Yay.
My desk is so littered with spider stuff right now. It's I feel like you know, like Carrot Top. You just keep pulling stuff. Oh wait, I got this. Oh wait, I got this. You know.
Well, Mark,
Okay.
I have the opposite. I sold like 90% of my comic collection.
Yeah, you said that. Yeah.
And I'm
Everything.
supposed, yeah, it's still freaking me out.
Okay, we're waiting 1 more minute and then we're going to start. And as people, if they come wandering in, that's great. And if they don't, we don't care because we are all happy to be here. So,
Well, we have 7 now.
yeah, there you go. We have 7. That's what I mean. People just sort of roll in. I've had people come in as late as 15 or 20 minutes after the program started, and you never know.
Well, the Ghostbuster community in Chicago knows that it was going on because Elizabeth and Chris were telling them about that. So they're probably going to pick up on the tape because that's what everybody, people YouTube.
You know that I have to tell you, I have done it myself so many
Yeah.
times now where I just go, oh yeah, I really didn't make that, but hey, look, I can do this instead. And it's okay.
Sure.
So we're going to go ahead and start. For those of you who are attending, thank you for coming. This is me, Penny from Eisenhower Library, even though it says Eisenhower Library because I didn't change my name. Sorry about that. But thank you. And we hope that you come to the rest of the Comic-Con events that are going to be going on tomorrow because we have a really cool lineup lined up for that. A bunch of very interesting panels, I think, starting at 9:30 tomorrow morning. You can find all that information on the library homepage, which is eisenhowerlibrary.org. We are in webinar form, so if you're an attendee, you do not have a camera, you do not have a mic. So if you've got any questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll address those after the program. And I think that's about it. We have Mark Braun, Lance Anderson, and Larry Parr here. And Mark is going to actually take over from here. So Mark, off you go.
Thank you. Thank you.
All
Penny.
yours.
Well, welcome, true believers, to one of the greatest characters that have ever been created. You've known him as, and I tried to create a list. Lance, tell me if I've screwed up. Peter Parker, Myles Morales, Spider Gwen Stacy, Spider Ham, Penny Parker, Kane Parker, Ben Reilly, Spider-Man 2099. I loved that series. The Iron Spider-Man that Tony Stark created, Spider-Woman, and Spider-Man Noir. Larry Parr, did I miss anybody?
I don't think so.
Lance, I know we're longtime lovers and readers of this character. Can I ask you, where did your love of Spider-Man, or as a fan, begin?
For me, it was entering the 3rd grade. I have no idea why I can remember that. But it was one of those funny things where the animated Spider-Man was on, and I never got to see a full episode in my childhood because they were showing it on Sunday mornings. And so we would be, the kids would be trying to dress as slowly as possible so we could go off to church but we would actually get to see some of the Spider-Man program. So we stalled church for 10 years so we could watch that Spider-Man animated show. So that's my very start with Spider-Man and that the first time I saw Spider-Man, it shifted Batman to second place in my heart.
So you went from DC to Marvel pretty quickly.
Yep.
Were you reading the comics at the time, or were you just following the animated?
I was reading the comics. I had an older cousin who had left his comics with his mom after he was in the armed forces. He was in Korea, and he left his books to both me and his sibling.
Mhm.
And so every time we would go see my Aunt Gloria, she would say, "Okay, what are you going to take today?"
That's a wonderful way to do it. So somebody else kind of introduced you to the fold?
Yeah, and my mom, or rather my dad, worked as in publishing, in newspaper publishing, and they would gather comics. I don't know how they did it, but whether it was just was samples that came to the office or what. But every once in a while we would show up, like if one of the cars was down, my mom would drive us down to the south end of the loop, and we'd go up to my dad's office. And once we got off the elevator, things would disappear off desks and comic books would be replaced. And I think they were nudie cutie stuff, but it could be wrong.
That's so cool. I'm going to step back because some people in the area in Norwich and Harwood Heights may know the background of the Eisenhower Library to comics and how we're sort of connected. Alex Ross was connected. Certainly Tom Gianni, who did our remarkable mural of the dragon, is connected. His brother had been doing Prince Valiant, the comic strip, for quite a while. I had published a magazine years and years ago called, you know the word, you may not have seen the magazine, Fanboy Magazine. And my second issue, I managed to con my friend Alex Ross, who was working on a brand new series called Marvels, to contribute a cover. But I had the very first interview with Alex in a fanzine, despite what some people might want to say. Wizard Magazine always claimed that state. So in a weird way, he did, I don't know if you fellows knew it, he did this amazing series called Marvels.
Mhm.
And it retells the history of comics. And just by chance, because Larry and I, who I'm going to introduce, give me a couple of minutes on this, Larry. I'm going to introduce how we met, had been working on a series, Slimer, for Now Comics. Alex was also there, much younger fella, asked me if I would, and our kids, pose as characters for this series. So I had actually, as a little boy growing up, you never think you're going to end up in a comic, but I got a chance to actually be in the death of Gwen Stacy right there. Now that famous panel with Phil Sheldon, the photographer and the journalist, right there, he has his eye patch on. That actually came out because that issue of Gwen Stacy went out nationally with a blot of ink over the face of that man in the crowd. Just a single shot. John Romita drew it. And Alex Ross used that as the jumping off point to create his character of a journalist who records the history of the Marvel universe. So I got a chance to actually walk through the comic that really got me started as a kid reading. But let me give you the intro so I can get to the main guy right here. When we talk about Spider-Man, you've got to go back to 1962. But let's step back just a little bit further. For people who don't know or may know, Frederick Wertham published a book called The Seduction of the Innocent in 1954. And he was going after comic books galore in the United States. He was trying to shut down the gory stuff, the murder stuff, the sexy stuff. He said, You know, it was impacting our youth. It was turning us all into a nation of juvenile delinquents. And he may have been right. I mean, there were a lot of comic book publishers at the time. The center of them were all in New York. There were over 1,000 in 1954 artists, writers, editors, letterers, printers working on comics in the United States. Most of them were being printed, by the way, in Sparta, Illinois. So you had two centers. One was the production in Sparta. They continued to print to the last days of comics, and New York, where they were being produced. The company that they were trying to go after the most was Educational Comics, or for short, EC Comics. Bill Gaines inherited that from his father, who was tragically killed in an accident. And Bill Gaines decided, I'm going hell bent for leather. And he began to write the bloodiest, coolest comics, bringing in some of the greatest talent that ever existed on paper. Frank Frazetta, Jack Davis, Mort Drucker, or was it Drucker? Yes, and so many people in between. When they got nailed by Wortham trying to shut down comics, all these publishers panicked. A lot of them shut down. EC decided to kind of fold it into something. So the usual gang of artists and writers quickly became, surprise, the usual gang of idiots, and they created Mad Magazine. Those guys continued on. They were extremely successful, but they had their heart and soul in horror comics. Now, in 1954, another person was breaking into comics. His name was Steve Ditko. This is a collection of the Charlton series that he did, The Thing. He did a handful of issues of this, but these were his very first work, and they were exquisitely done. He knew how to handle short comics, and especially great horror. On the other side, going back to 1941, a young 16-year-old kid by the name of Stan Lee did his very first story in an issue of USA #1. I'm not going to answer that, but I might have another guest coming in here. Actually, so he wrote this when he was 16 years old, and I met Stan when I was a kid, and I actually had USA #1. And he told me, where'd you get that? Well, he told me that was the first story he wrote at 16 years old. He continued to write for primarily Atlas, which was the parent company that would eventually become Marvel. But they were working on a book, one of several, that was amazing adult fantasy. We all know number 15. This was number 12. And it was at number 12 that the publisher told a young Steve Ditko, who was co-writing and co-creating with Stan Lee, that it was going to be canceled. And he didn't care what they did in the final issue, 15. So they did that 11-page story. Voicemail. I'll get that later. They did that 11-page story that was the very first story of Spider-Man, reprinted right here. Yeah, my comics are pretty lousy, but it's all there. But that's my 1964 issue. It's still kind of all there though. Years ago, I met Jim Steranko, the artist, and I said, I have this in this book of yours. I'd like to get it signed, but I was embarrassed to bring it in, but because it's so beaten up. He said, so you read it. That meant you loved it. And I think when kids don't get those comics graded, when they are really ripped up, it meant that you probably really love this material. But anyway, that story appeared. Amazing Adult Fantasy failed and closed. And just a matter of months later, Spider-Man appeared for the very first time. So Ditko and Stan Lee were working together side by side, co-collaborating. They were working on this character from two different angles. Stan Lee loved to write about superheroes, but Steve Ditko was a follower of the author Ayn Rand. And he had a real sense of putting angst into the portrayal of his characters. So when he did The Thing, he really honed his craft as an artist But what he really wanted to do is to create the anti-hero type of a character. And that continued with Marvel for quite a few issues. I think that's number 20, 21, 20 something, 31. Ditko helped to create the universe that Stan wanted to have. Really creative villainy. Somewhere in the late 30s, they had a parting of the ways. Now, it depends on where you go for that information. There's a phenomenal book called Stuff Said, which is available at the library, and you can get them also online. And that's talking to the late Jack Kirby. It talks to the late Stan Lee. It talks to Ditko and other people who contributed to the Marvel Universe. And there are a lot of stories about who said what, who did what, how Stan did things. But one thing that Ditko did was he was talking to Jack Kirby saying, you don't have to sit here and be a work for hire. You could be a guy who gets more credit. Why don't you come and join me at Charlton? And Jack said, absolutely not. But he did follow him to DC. DC gave Steve Ditko the freedom to take the same type of anti-hero formula that he wanted to carry on, and he brought it to the Creeper. He brought it to Hawk and Dove, and a number of titles that he and Jack were creating for them. They gave them free reign to do. So Marvel's loss was DC's find. But here's where we kind of jumped back. Let's go back just a little bit to 1966. Animation. If you were going to catch the youth market, Stan Lee was trying to get the college age reader, but animation was calling. So in 1966, the very first Spider-Man series premiered. It was 3 seasons. It began to tip the marketing of the character toward toys. Anybody remember the Spidey mobile? Ugh, but it was there.
Mhm.
And the artist was switched in the comics in the meantime to John Romita, who was more of an all-American boy, and he did exquisite work. So it took the direction way over to another side, but animation began to come in. And there is nobody better to know animation and to know exactly what it was like to work with Stan Lee than our special guest. Larry Parr has written, Larry, stop me if I'm wrong. You've got 11 murder mysteries published on Amazon right now, 2 series.
Mhm. That's right.
7 books in the John Stauber mystery series. You've got 4 books so far in the Devon Swan Investigate series. You've finished the 5th book in the Devon Swan series. That's still coming up. But let's talk about some of the series, because kids and friends, when I told them that you would possibly talk, were flipping out. You wrote The Pride of the X-Men, the pilot series, the pilot episode for the animated X-Men. You wrote Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Spider-Man, 1981, G.I. Joe, Defenders of the Earth, the Smurfs, the Transformers, Dino Riders, Ray Bradbury Theater, Street Fighter, Slimer and the Real Ghostbusters, Heathcliff, Peter Pan and the Pirates, Beetlejuice. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you pretty much got it. You have more there than I remember.
And I swore that they had you listed on Spider-Woman too, although you said you had worked on the treatment of that.
No, I wrote 1 episode of Spider-Woman,
Okay.
and then they gave the series to another writer and said, we want you to write all of them. So I wasn't even aware if they used my episode that I wrote or not.
I think you're going to be surprised. I'll have to send you a copy of this. I'm so happy to have you on as a guest. Now, people don't know this, but we actually knew each other now for 30 years.
Probably.
We did the comic book Slimer
That's
together
right.
based on some of your scripts.
Those were the first and only comic books I ever wrote.
There was the last that either of us would ever do for that particular company.
Oh, yes.
And ironically, Alex Ross, who I had mentioned earlier with Marvels, was one of the other artists, just like us, who was sitting there saying, how come I'm not getting my checks?
Yes.
So we all did kind of well. Can I ask you what it was like and how did you get involved with Stan?
Well, I met Stan actually about 2 years before I started working for Marvel. I met him when I worked at DePatie Freeling, and Stan was working at DePatie Freeling as well. Just on various projects. I don't even remember what the projects were right now. But then Margaret found out that I was working for Deke, which was an animation studio, which has since been bought by Disney and I think is now folded. But I was working for Deke, and Margaret Lesh, who was running Marvel at the time, just recruited me out of Deke and gave me a job and told me I had a 1-year contract to work for Marvel. At the time, I really knew very little about comic books. I am just amazed at what you know about them. I'm just flabbergasted. When I went to work for Marvel, I knew almost nothing about comic books. Stan wanted me to write what were called Bibles, which gives a background of all the characters. You hand a Bible to a writer, and then a writer has enough information to write an episode for that series. The Bible just has all the backstory, everything about it. I couldn't write Bibles for all the characters that Marvel did until I read their backstories and the comic books have been written by him. He actually had Jim Shooter, who was head of Marvel Comics. Jim Shooter would actually send me packages through Federal Express. Almost every day I got a new package of comic books. Stan said Jim actually had to go out to comic book stores and buy some of them because they weren't even available at Marvel. So I read comic books after comic books after comic books, and I was being paid Marvel salary, which was pretty good at the time, to read comic books. And then I would sit down and write what are called Bibles for the shows. And then Stan would look at the Bible and he'd make whatever notes he wanted to make on it. And then I would make a final, and then we would turn it in. And that's really how I got into the business with Stan. I knew almost nothing about comics. I have to admit that. And I am just floored by what you know.
Well, you did pretty darn good for a guy who didn't know the material, because you worked with some of their greatest characters.
Yes, I did. I actually lucked out. I got to work for 4 years directly with Stan.
Yeah.
And that was marvelous. He would take me out to lunch probably once a month for 4 years. And he and I would just go out to lunch together. And but the thing is, I hardly ever talked about comic books with him because I knew very little about comic books. And I think Stan appreciated that. He liked someone who wasn't, a sycophant, who didn't, hang on his every word and kowtow to every single thing he said. Because to be very honest with you, I knew who Stan was.
Mhm.
Like I said, I had worked with him a little bit at DePatie Freeling. So I knew who he was. I knew he was head of Marvel, or a big muckety-muck at Marvel. And, I knew that he had written all these characters or had helped develop all these characters. I won't get into that. I know there's a controversy now about who did what
Mhm.
back in the day.
Yes.
I won't get into that because I don't know anything about that. All I know is that Stan was a very, very, very nice person.
You mentioned a story to me a couple of years back about taking someone for a walk who was on staff.
Oh yeah, one of the artists, whose name I can't remember, he was very overweight. I mean, most of the artists were.
Well,
Okay, let's face it.
No,
most
you
of
know
them
how
are.
we live, you know.
Yeah, well, and anyway, this artist's father had died. And he was relatively well known in the industry, evidently. And Stan wanted to get this artist in better shape. So we started walking around the neighborhood. And we, we would just go out for about an hour every morning and just walk. And Stan was probably about 60 at the time. And he would walk so fast, the rest of us would have trouble keeping up with him. He was just an incredible amount of energy all the time.
Maybe that was the high-strung New Yorker in him.
Maybe. Anyway, finally, everybody slowly dropped out of the walking thing, including the artist that we originally did it for. Eventually, it was only Stan and I going out to walk. And and eventually he finally said, you know, I've got too much work to do and it's just you and I now. I'm going to have to cancel these walks too. But for a long time, probably a month, we went out walking every single morning, just walking around the neighborhood. We were in Van Nuys in Southern California, so it hardly ever rained. It was always nice, always sunny. And we just enjoyed going out and walking.
I can't imagine. I'm sure he looked at the amount of work that you produced, and he was probably just in awe of everything that you had done. Because it's everything that if I didn't watch it, my children watched it, and everyone in between has seen your work.
You know, at one time back in the mid 1980s, we figured out that somewhere in the world, one of my cartoons was playing every single half hour of every single day. Now, some of those might have been playing in Afghanistan. I don't know, but you know, maybe there are only 4 people watching, but still.
You are out there. Wasn't it Fox that aired the first incarnation of the X-Men animated series?
What?
That you had done Pride of the X-Men, and then you did the Dark Phoenix.
Yes, then I did the Dark Phoenix.
No small stuff, man.
That was actually a very, very, very interesting show to work on. I remember at the time I did the Dark Phoenix, Haim Saban was actually doing most of the producing on the show at that time.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with Haim.
Of the studio, yes.
Yes, well, Saban Studios. Anyway, Haim at one point came into the room and he looked at me and he said, "This is amazing. I'm producing the stupidest show on television, which was Power Rangers, and I'm producing the most intelligent cartoon on television, which was X-Men."
I read your scripts on those because you have to with your friend's work, and what can I tell you? You know, I am in awe of how you handled a very dark comic book major event and turned it into something absolutely fantastic.
Oh, well, thank you, Mark. I remember going to the very first meeting with Haim Saban at his studio, the very first Power Ranger meeting, where he was trying to find writers for his show. And he had already filmed the pilot episode, even before he showed it to Margaret Lesh. Oh, you're right, it wasn't Fox, because Margaret moved over to Fox. Anyway, he had filmed the first pilot episode, and he had the Black Ranger dance across the table, dancing in everybody's food. And he finally gets to the end of the table and he causes a waitress to spill a tray of drinks. And I said, you can't do that. You can't have one of your main good guy characters do those things. And Haim looked at me and he said, "I've already filmed it. If you don't want to work on the show, don't work on the show."
Oops.
And I said, "Well, I can't work on it if you're going to have that scene in it, because that's just wrong."
Yeah.
And Haim said, I don't care. I've already filmed it. I'm going to take it to Fox tomorrow. I'm going to show it to Margaret, and we're going to be on the air. He took it to Fox and showed it to Margaret, and Margaret said, if you'll reshoot that scene, I'll buy the show.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the changes that had happened on television and how Spider-Man spun off into an entirely different universe. Talk about universes, the multiverse, because of the animated series that started in '66, the next one that you had worked on, and in between. At the time, and I'm going by my notes, Spider-Woman had hit TV, CBS on live TV. Boy, this was a great time to be a kid or to have a color TV. You had the Hulk for 5 seasons on CBS with Bill Bixby. You had Wonder Woman for 4 years on CBS. Japan did a great live action Spider-Man series that was phenomenal before Sony Columbia did that first movie. But for people in between who didn't know, there's a lot of material that's out there, and most of it, by the way, is available through your local library. Let me ask Lance, did you happen to have a particular run or story in the comics or on TV that you thought was particularly cool, that really blew you away?
The one thing that I grew up as a 8-year-old, or started reading comics as about 8-year-old, and I was just Batman. That was it. Didn't care for Superman quite that much. And then my dad gave me a Spider-Man comic book, and that totally flipped my life. And I went from being just a fair weather comic reader to a notoriously fetishy with my comics. And so I was reading all the Marvel books that I could get my hands on, mostly Spider-Man and the Avengers. Those were my favorites.
I had Avengers #4. It's still sitting down in the basement. But my very first encounter with Spider-Man was, as luck would have it, was back then in the candy stores and small stores. You could get comics in a pack, 3 for 15 cents, where they'd rip off a portion of the cover. And I had Amazing Adult Fantasy 15, and I had Hulk 1 and 3. My mom threw those out when we were living in an apartment, and it was in a box on the landing going upstairs. My grades were bad, and whoosh, out they went. Thanks, I could have bought a house. But reading that first story absolutely hit all the right notes, because here he was a high school kid. He was puny Parker. He was everything that most geek kids, especially young preteens like me, were. And you can identify with him. And the short story in itself, again, because Ditko was an Ayn Rand follower, and he had a certain logical way of going in there to write these Twilight Zone-y pieces, had him gain this power, waste it, become jaded by it, and then it affected his family by killing the one person, his uncle, who was taking care of him, and he blamed himself. That was the way it ended. My fault, it's all my fault, was the way that story ended. I know that they had to spin it out, and they did a great job, but that for me set the tone for everything I wanted to read. After that, I discovered Will Eisner, who had done the Spirits, and Harvey was reprinting some of those. And if we ever get other people who want to talk about that, I got Eisner stories galore. But there's a set of books in the Spider-Man series that wasn't that long ago, and that was when Dr. Octopus, I got to see if I've got dates on them. It was just around issue 700 where Dr. Octopus figured out how he could invade Peter's body and take him over. So Peter and Doc Ock traded bodies. Dr. Octopus was dying and was being held somewhere. And Peter Parker was taken over by the mind of Dr. Octopus, who said, I am now you. But because of it, and because they had a very open end that they could run with, I think they gave it lots of issues to say, what happens if the villain becomes the hero? What if he begins to empathize so much with how good, this young man was? He realizes, I've made an incredibly big mistake, and I'm going to make him the spectacular Spider-Man. I'm going to give everything that I've created over to this character. I'm going to fight crime. I'm going to be great. And of course, it doesn't work out for him because there's a kernel of Parker still in there who keeps fighting back. And finally, Dr. Octopus gives up. And he said, I'm warning you because I'm going to curse you with the greatest curse you could live with. You are what you are. And I said, I know what you are, but you must live with what you are. And Peter comes back, but it was such a powerful piece and such a powerful run that after decades, I thought somebody just hit it with a power that they hadn't done in decades. And I've talked too much. We are going to allow people to type in any questions they may have for us, just in case they do. Larry, the book you were what you were talking about with Stan and the versions of the stories of who wrote what were brought up again in the book called Stuff Said. My son-in-law has my copy, and it's being revised all the time as they pick up more information, but it's just quotes by those guys talking about what it was like. I had a chance in, I want to say 1982 maybe, and Mary was with me at a comic convention when we ran into Jack. And I bought a Captain America page for $15.
Oh, wow.
Because this is the way they were looking at the time at people like Jack Kirby and unbelievably Steve Ditko and Gil Kane. And I've got some Kurt Swan pages, that Superman pages that are gorgeous that they put up for auction and nobody wanted to buy. Did we miss some? Did we catch something that nobody else knew?
You did, I think. I did put in the chat a link to the page that has all of the books, the Spider-Man books that are owned at Eisenhower Library. There's a lot of them, people.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in the teen space, the Spider-Man stuff is really popular. It circulates a lot. Lance, we've lost you. We don't see you at all. Yeah, it's really popular, really popular stuff.
Larry, how can people find your current pieces?
Well, I guess you just have to go to Amazon and type in Larry Parr.
So what I did that a little bit.
And-
Let me do that again, and I'll put that in the chat for you guys.
Okay.
Hold on, I might have to research it, but I did do it. I swear I did. Yeah, I'll just do it again.
Well, I know.
Look who's swinging through here. I can't seem to stop him.
Yeah, I love that.
Get out of here. Come on. I got some raid. Get out of here.
I never really considered the fact that a villain wouldn't know that they were a villain until I started reading Dr. Doom.
Yes.
Dr. Doom never thought he was a bad guy. He said, turn the world over to me and I will end poverty. I will end hunger. I will end all the bad things in the world. I will make this world a perfect place to live in. All you have to do is turn it over to me.
Yes.
He did not consider himself a bad guy. And that was an eye-opener for me.
What a remarkable character. He was damaged as a result, I think, of a lab accident, terribly burned. And he had his own nation where everything bloomed. he would cure diseases. He would-
Right.
Isn't that one of the definitions of a really good definition of a bad guy is that he doesn't believe that he's a bad guy? He
Yes.
really believes he's doing the right thing, right? Or he
Yeah.
wouldn't be doing it.
And Dr. Doom sincerely believed he was the good guy, and everybody else was out to stop him, to thwart him,
Hmm.
and that they were being bad by thwarting him.
Yeah. Kind of classic, isn't it?
Oh, to me, that was, I believe Stan had a lot to do with creating Dr. Doom. And to me, that was one of the greatest characters he ever created.
Interesting.
It was fantastic. And it's also fantastic. I got two authors in the same room here, Penny and Larry, finally meeting.
Writing two totally different things.
Yeah.
Same
I would
kind of
like that.
audience, same kind of audience, but Larry has set the standard for a couple of generations now, I think, of animation fans, as well as
Oh,
film.
well, I appreciate that, Mark. It doesn't feel that way now, though.
You did
I
'em.
don't know.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah,
Well,
but everything builds on history, right?
Mm,
So
I'd like to
Absolutely.
think so, but
got to, it's got to start somewhere.
Well, I think if we may not have covered a lot of the middle ground, and I could pull out a whole bunch of comics in between.
No, I'm going to ask, I want to ask a question. I want to ask a final question since no one's putting questions in. I want to ask each of you what your very favorite, anything in the Spider-Verse, your very favorite thing is. Your one favorite thing.
I wrote a series of Spider-Man episodes that revolved around Dr. Doom. I wrote 4 or 5 episodes. I can't remember which it was, all revolving right around Dr. Doom, and they were all sort of tied together a little bit. Those were my favorite things. The Doctor Prescribes DOOM, I think was the first one in that series. And they were just, I enjoyed those. I enjoyed writing them. I thought they were probably some of my best work. And I think they should have stood up. I was told that they were put together as a film and shown in Europe together, all 5 of them. I don't know if that's true. I think I was told a lot of things back in the 1980s, and I wasn't sure how much of it was really true. But I believe that they did that. Anyway, that's my favorite.
Cool. Lance.
It's so it's Amazing Spider-Man. I can't remember the number, but it's the last, no, it's the first of the second of the Hobgoblin, not the Hobgoblin, but Goblin.
Green Goblin?
The Green Goblin, yeah. So
Going back
that's
to the original Harry Osborn.
yeah. And that was really, really like I was frightened of that book when I read it.
Good, good. Mark, what's yours?
You know, this is the life.
Got to pick one. You got to pick one.
It's got to be the multiverse animated movie. They took all of them together. They found a way to bring all of them into the same screen with a variety of different animation techniques. Sony threw every penny on the screen, and it was a magnificent thing to see.
Wow. I'd like to see that. That sounds cool.
You catch it on a big screen, but if you have to, put it at the DVD on and get this close to your screen at home and try and take it in. Because when it was shown in IMAX, it was a phenomenally beautiful piece.
Mm.
And they did it with such loving care for those characters. They could take, an old character like Peter Parker, mix in Myles Morales. Oh, quick question. Can I do one before we run off of here? Guys,
Yep.
What do you think the future of Spider-Man would be?
That's a good question.
Lance?
I will say this. I will say this about Myles Morales. I do not see him having the same appeal. At least I don't in the books that we have here, in the kids that read the books, Myles Morales doesn't seem to excite them as much.
Is it because is it the Peter Parker thing where he's a wimpy guy and he doesn't have He doesn't stand up for himself.
Oh, I don't
Or-
know if it's that they're used to Spider-Man looking and acting a certain way or exactly what it is, but it
Okay.
doesn't seem to have, and it's newer, so it wouldn't have the staying power yet, but it doesn't seem to have hit with the same intensity that the regular Spider-Mans do,
Well, I
and
can-
what I've experienced.
Larry, you have any thoughts on, before we sign out of here, that you think you'd like to see Spider-Man do as animated?
Well, there's so little being done in animation right now with the live action movies and whatnot taking over the world. I have to admit, though, that I prefer the older version, but that may be just because that's what I grew up with. I mean, that's what I first learned about. The Spider-Man from the mid 1980s.
Yes.
And that's not really good. I think he needs to, advance and go forward and go into the, 2030s. And, we have to see something here.
He did get married for, a cup of coffee in comics before they decided to roll it back and make him a teenager again.
Get that.
I get it. I get it from a marketing point of view, but this was a phenomenally great event because he finally got the original girl,
Right.
and everything should have been right. And of course, they had a daughter, and then they moved into an alternate universe of Spider-Gwen and other characters that were phenomenal, because you can go back and say, what if it was Gwen Stacy? What if it was this? What if it was this? And say, wow, let's re-examine. Can I throw one out there for you? I'm going to put this out here. If you have not seen the series Earth X by Alex Ross and a bunch of other guys, this is the way they envisioned Peter Parker would be. In that series,
Really?
everybody knew that he was Spider-Man. So as a retired superhero, he comes back and he becomes a police officer. But of course, they had a kid. So, and I got tons of Ross stuff in the basement. And who gets hit by Venom but her?
Ah.
Oh, have we got another episode that we could all do together? Thank you to everyone. Is there anybody, anything we want to conclude? Or we're pretty good?
When's the movie coming out? Speaking of, this was sort of supposed to, be kind of a lead up to the hot shot movie that I don't really know anything about, but Steve told me all about. So
They're going to do the alternate universe thing, I believe, from what I've seen, because they're bringing in Doctor Strange, Peter Parker going back and saying, well, people know who I am and they're in danger. We've got to go back and we've got to erase this. And Doctor Strange goes in there and said, well, then we're going to change this by casting a spell that no one will know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. But that goes back to the events of this, when he makes a deal to save Aunt May's life with Mephisto, saying, I'll save her life, but you've got to give up that life. You've got to give up this. And as the events of his life begin to fade with Mary Jane, Mephisto's telling him, pity you've lost your bride and your child. What? And he never understood that there was going to be an heir to the Spider-Man character.
yeah.
It's fun to be this age, and we're all still fans. Thank you,
Well-
Larry Parr, so much. You have been a good
You're
friend.
more than welcome.
You have guided so many of us through wonderful animation. And Lance, thank you so much. You're a good buddy. And Penny, thank you so much. Penny's books are available. They have them also in the library, but you can certainly order hers up. She's an Oprah Winfrey book selection. And thank you everyone for tuning in. If you like it and you want to do some more, let us know.
Absolutely. And we hope to see tomorrow at a bunch of our panels, you guys, and thank you all. And I'm going to go ahead and leave. Oh, actually, I need Chris, who is the moderator, to go ahead and end you because I can't, because he is the host.